Hi, everyone. Welcome to yet another episode of Just Crunch It. With us today, we have James Eagle, who's the founder of EAGLI, a company empowering the world to tell better stories. This episode is going to be about how you create the right content, how you measure the impact of what you're producing, and finally, can you make an empire out of it? James has worked for a number of financial institutions during his course of his career, including the likes of HSBC, Gartmore, Fidelity, Unigestion, and Vontobel Asset Management. Welcome to the show, James. How are you doing today?
I'm very well, thank you, Vikram. Thank you for inviting me to your show. It's a pleasure to be here.
Pleasure is all mine. I was very intrigued when I ran into Eakly the first time, and more so because, of course, I am building in the domain of data. Most of my audience cares about data, and when you bring a data narrative to anything, you have my attention. So I have a ton of questions for you, and I hope we can like just go off track into some very interesting conversations. Usually, we focus on only one topic in an episode, sort of a masterclass, so that this is not like a generic, oh, what did you do in life and whatnot. But of course, like we'll catch up a little bit on how you have come up to the stage where you are as well. But without further ado, I often see that the way you have described Eagly on social media platforms, on your websites, and so on, is that hey, without data, you're just another person, right? Like, and that's a very deep statement. It almost reminds me of that statement that my friends, senior friends, used to make when I entered the university. They were like, Vikram, make sure that you're just not another roll number. You're not just another face in the crowd. And when I read this for the first time, that was the first emotion that came into my mind. But I want to ask you why that statement? Like, what's the story there? What exactly is Eagly? How do you describe your baby?
I mean, it's a really good question. I think these days we live in this crazy world. So data is just exploding exponentially, as we all know that. We know that data just keeps on creating more and more there's more and more data being created from lots and lots of things. And it's not just sensors and embedded into technology and the internet and all these things. It's just there's just an absolute explosion in data. And the funny thing is about data is that rather than providing clarity, it's actually made the world somewhat more confusing because we're so flooded with data that our human brains can't handle it. We've evolved over millennia to hunt and gather and to live in communities, and really the explosion in data has taken humanity by surprise. We haven't evolved fast enough to handle the sheer volume of information that's out there. And I think that's where, for me, my journey started, because in this world full of data, you've got misinformation, you've got geopolitical tension, you've got all these problems. You've got politicians quoting statistics that are false. You've got lots of these kind of these kind of social media style narratives that have no backing or grounding. And I think that's really you know where where I think my journey with data started from. So it's that kind of frustration with the world the way it is. Rather than making the world clearer, it's actually reduced the visibility. It's made it harder to understand. And I think that's why data visualization exists, because data visualization allows you to see through all of that mist in a very human way, in a way that we as human beings can understand. So I think that's the other thing about data, because data itself, it's not as scientific as we like to think it is. It can be very biased. And this is something that people don't understand. For me, all data is bias. So if you take something like inflation today is not the same as inflation 30 years ago. The basket of goods 30 years ago that we measured inflation by has totally changed. The world that we lived in 30 years ago is totally different. The economy that we lived in 30 years ago is totally different. So we can't really make a fair comparison between now and 30 years ago, whether it's inflation, GDP, or any other metric. And but we still do, because we need to understand a story. We need, as human beings, to understand where we've come from, or where we're going. And that's why we need to look at data. And so, although there is definitely the scientific side to looking at data, to trying to understand the world, there's also the human side, the storytelling, and the emotional side that is often neglected when you look at data. And when you look at a data visualization, it's all about storytelling. It's all about touching human emotions and experiencing data in a human way, not in a robotic way. And I think that's probably where I started from. So yeah, every person, don't just be a number. Don't just be a point of data. Be who you are. Be a human being. Experience the world the way that you're designed to experience the world, and look at data the way that you want to look at data for your perspective and your own human experience, and enjoy it. So look at the data visualization. Enjoy the colors. Enjoy the fact that sometimes the rules are broken. Sometimes in data visualization. Um, and don't look at it always through a completely academic lens. Look at it, try to enjoy it as much as possible as well.
Very, very unique perspective, James, I must say. But I have a question here. So I want to make sense of what you just said. And um, the first thing that comes to my mind, because you were just talking about financial data and like politicians and whatnot. And of course, I always steer clear of political topics. So this is not about that. But I have been getting a sense, I've been walking into a lot of conversations saying that, hey, we have elections going around all around the world. Like there's elections happening in Europe, there's elections in Asia, there's US elections, and it just looks like that we are all into a deep recession. It's just that we have masked it by the narrative saying that no, 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 all is well, everything is going fine. Now, to someone who's listening it and trying to comprehend what it means that, hey, go live life, be a person, look at the data, make sense out of it, because you also said that sometimes what was true as a scale or a benchmark or as a delta 30 years back is not necessarily true today. So my question is, like, when I talk about this narrative, or you could pick another example from your uh, life or any observations that you've had, how would you recommend someone consumes this information? Because I have the option of actually just believing in it and going all finicky about it, that, oh my god, we are in going into a recession, this is so bad, and feel sad about it. I can just deny it outrightly, saying no, this is not how it works, and maybe produce 10 Instagram reels on it. Or I could find a middle ground. And what exactly are you prescribing here?
I mean, I don't think you can really be prescriptive with data. So are we going to a recession? Um, you could argue, yes, we're going to a recession, but you could also argue, no, we're not going to a recession, because data will contain lots of truths, and sometimes those truths can contradict each other. That's not to say that one is right and one is wrong. It's just what they show you are possibilities. So if you look at, like, for example, the United States right now, at the macro landscape, what's really holding up economic growth in the United States is consumer spending. What's behind consumer spending? A strong labor market, and um, and and also plentiful consumer credit. So there's a lot of consumer credit there. Now you could also look at those little nuggets and say, well, the labour market's starting to cool a bit, and the Federal Reserve are getting a little bit nervous about that. So maybe they're going to change their policy. Maybe they won't raise rates. Maybe they will keep rates on hold, and maybe they might even cut rates. You know, and that's the problem when you start looking at the possibilities. All you can do is uh, make predictions or try to make sense of what you see. So you can never be 100% certain of which direction it will go. And the other problem is that because there's so much data out there, sometimes there are things or factors or explanatory variables that you just didn't see, that actually have an impact on this very complex system that we live in, the economy. And so I think in a way, it's I I think what I do is I try to look at stories and try to make sense of those stories, and I'm not afraid to contradict them. I'll look at another story. I'll look at the story that says the economy is going to go into a recession next year, but I'll also look at the story that the economy is going to have a soft landing, or the economy is actually going to overheat, and the Fed might actually have to raise rates to slow it down. So I think that's the way that I look at it, and the reason why I like to look at the different perspectives is because the problem in economics is that people tend to oversimplify things, and that is a natural thing to do. It's a natural human thing to do. When we're faced with complexity, we try to simplify. We try to group things together. It's a human bias. It's human nature to do that. It's the way that we try to understand the information around us, digest it, and make a decision that will help us survive. The problem is that when
Yeah.
those systems become so complicated, um, there is a danger that we start making mistakes with our predictions. So when we're living in a very, very data-rich environment like we're living in now, with so much information up there, there's a very, very real risk that we make mistakes, and a lot of the time we do. Then throw in the human emotion side, and you've got a recipe for disaster, because we have this kind of we, when I was at university or when I was at school, I was taught that you have this thing called utility, and the utility is what you get when you eat a bar of chocolate. A negative utility is what you get when you experience something negative, like you burn yourself or something like that. And we always consider these units of utility as this kind of these equally measured units, but in reality, it's not. The utility you feel when you lose money is much, much deeper than when you make
Bigger.
money,
Yeah.
and that distorts the way that we measure risk, and that we and the way that we use data to understand the risks and understand the future. So we can be overly complacent at the wrong time, and panicky when we shouldn't be. So that's why markets rise and fall and crash. And so I'm always really cautious about saying things like that. Like, are we going into a recession? I don't know, 100%. Are the warning signs there? Yes, but Keynes also said, in the long run, we're all dead. So you can never tell when something's going to happen. You can only just try to interpret it and try to tell the story behind it. But that's all you can ever do. It's there to try and make the world clearer for you and the way that you perceive it. But you will never know for certainty whether what you're seeing is correct and what you interpret
Yeah.
is 100% correct.
But this is tying very nicely into what I want to talk about next. But I have a question related to what we just talked about. So, for an average person, an average individual, when you are talking about all of the things, somewhere listening to this episode, someone who probably doesn't have an economics background is just going to be thinking, "Hey, I don't know what they're talking about, right? Like, what are these markers? What are the rates going up, and so on?" And they sometimes just don't have that ability to consume that data and like make sense out of it. So is the onus more onto the content creator to sort of ensure that the data or the story is very evidently like consumable, or is it on both sides? Because the second aspect of, can people consume data better, if that world was possible today, it would change so much. Like everyone would be so well informed, probably a little bit unhappy, probably a little bit less stressed out about a few things. But that change can't just be brought about because I can't list down 10 steps that will make everyone in the world data literate. This problem is not in anybody's control. So who's the onus more onto to sort of ensure that people are actually consuming information with the right POV, not just taking one thing as a bias factor, and like at the same time having a life, like not just getting too stressed about the granularities.
I mean, I look at data visualization as a communication tool. It's a way to communicate, and it's a storytelling tool. So storytelling is the oldest form of communication in mankind, and really the onus, I believe, is on the storyteller. So if you think about it, back in the old days when we were cavemen, a father wouldn't give his son a 10 set guide to killing a mammoth. He would give him probably a really cool story about how he tackled a mammoth, broke his arm, and then finally managed to bring the animal down. And his eyes, you can imagine it, right? They're sitting around a campfire, and the son's eyes are bulging, and he's thinking, wow, my father's a hero. And then 10, 20 years later, that information that his father's told him has actually helped him kill a mammoth and save his tribe. And it's the same kind of thing. We're just doing it with data. And there is a responsibility on you as the storyteller, because what you've got to do is, first of all, you've got to go and get the data. So you've got to acquire it, you've got to clean it, and then you've got to explore the data. So the exploration part is really important, and something that no one really talks about. They talk about acquiring the data, like I got downloaded it, pressed a button, and cleaning is also really annoying. I mean, it's hard work cleaning data sets and building data sets, but exploring the data is part of is there's a huge responsibility behind that, because you've got to actually go in there and find that story that someone can relate to, and you've got to try and communicate that story in a way that someone will understand. So if I want to try to explain, the last thing that you should ever do is bamboozle your audience with data, because if you've done that, you failed. As soon as you're saying, well, I'm really sorry, it's so complicated because I'm a quant, you failed. You've failed in communicating the story that was behind that data set. The story is never going to be perfect. It's always going to be a simplification, or it's always going to miss parts of the data set. But the most important thing for you is that, as the storyteller, is that you're communicating and you're getting that information across to someone that could potentially save a person's life. For example, that we can go into hundreds of examples, whether or not it's the way that a doctor communicates more treatment to cancer patients. The way that the information is framed can lead to lower or higher mortality rates on a cancer ward. There's a huge
Absolutely.
level of responsibility behind how you convey that information to the end user. And I think, yes, you have to reduce complexity, to increase clarity, but also you must be careful not to remove too much information, as to dumb down or distort the story that you're trying to, or the story that's really behind the data set. So yeah, I think really there's a tremendous amount of responsibility on the person who's delivering data, whether it's through a data visualization or through any other means. And the chances are that if you're in that position, there'll be times when you make mistakes. And pretty much anyone who is involved in data will tell you that they've made mistakes, that there are things they wish they didn't do in a data visualization or any type of work that they've done.
Yeah. James, so I'm thinking about it, right? Like, and as a founder, more than often, so whatever you talked about, it's great, and maybe there are people who are content creators, who are thinking about, hey, how do I tell stories? Storytellers, they call themselves that, who can actually do a very good job at this. But for someone else, which is about 95%, 99% of the world, I don't know, it's a bit random number, but most of us are not like producing content full time. And if we are not producing content full time or not writing something, we are doing something else. We're thinking of, oh, I'm supposed to make this business, and this business would need me to go on and talk to the tenant who has got my office space. And then at the same time, there's an investor meeting that's happening. And then you have employees coming and saying they're not happy, they're happy. There's a bunch of other things happening, right? Like deals are not moving forward. Sometimes the person you're talking to just needs like more time to think. So you have a lot of factors that's like sort of leaving a very less of an area for you to focus exclusively on how do I go in and tell my story, right? Like now, for me, today, I'm maybe not at the exact starting point, but I'm no expert. And as a founder, 2 years back, 3 years back, when I was just getting started on it, I was very clueless because data or like publishing my viewpoint and like presenting it in the form of a story saying that, hey, this is what we're building and this is the future we are for, it was one of the 20 things that I was doing. So, of course, when I'm thinking of it from that lens, there's tons of thoughts in my head. Is me putting a content, it's as simple as a thing like putting a content on LinkedIn. Let's say I want to be very intentional about it. And of course, when I'm building a business as a founder, when I'm putting a piece of content on LinkedIn, there's a hope that, okay, someone is going to see, if it's related to data, someone is going to see it and come and say, I want to try what you're building. Could I buy your solution, right? Like everyone has their own motives. This can change profession by profession. But here, when I am going through this, like miscellaneous jobs from all different directions, and I'm worried about, is it going to align with my objective? What is the effort it would need from me? There are so many things I want to talk about. For example, today, if you ask me, I would love to talk about storytelling. Like I love making pitches and whatnot. I would love to talk about data because we are building for data. I have thoughts and opinions that might be very different and very interesting for a lot of decision makers and buyers and stakeholders. I would also love to talk about GTM because go to market when I was 2 years back, I had no clue how to go about scaling things in an industry that I had no background in, which was the cryptocurrency domain, where I had a background, but I was not, like, let's say, that well knit or that well placed. I was sitting back in India when I started my company, and it's like, okay, how do you go on and sell it to niches of people who are clustered at locations like Singapore, locations like Delaware and Colorado? And there's a lot of mistakes that I made. So I would love to talk about the GTM aspect of it. But then, of course, because of all the other things that keep happening in my life, you can't. So how do you recommend someone actually get started on this? Like, how do they find that
This is a
balance?
really good question.
Because for most of us, yeah, for most of us, it's not a full-time job. And how do I be good at it? Like, for whatever time I'm doing this.
I think if you're a founder, it is kind of a full-time job actually, because I mean, I'm also in the same situation as you. So, like all of us, we make when we start out, we don't have a clue what we're doing. I remember when I first started my business, I got myself a laptop. I sat down in a co-working place, plopped it down, and thought, I'm going to be a great businessman because I come from a banking background. And I sat there and looked at my laptop and thought, oh, okay, so where are the clients? How do I get them? And I realized I had no idea what I was doing. And it's that realization, like you're constantly learning, making mistakes and learning. And one of the things that I learned very, very early on is the importance of being visible. So, you know, yes, it's great to create great quality content, to tell fantastic stories. Number one thing that you have to be is visible. If nobody knows you're there, you're not going to make any money. And that's the reality. And let me put this in another way. If I shoot a video and 30,000 people watch that video, that means that 30,000 people out there have had a conversation with me. I've had a conversation with 30,000 people. Now, it doesn't matter how big my sales team hypothetically could be. I don't think I could have 30,000 conversations in 24 hours. And that's really the power of content. That's the power of visibility. That's the power of and scalability of the internet. And so, in that, if I had those 30,000 conversations, I've got the power to tailor that conversation, to say what I want to say what I need to say in order to achieve a goal or an objective. And so for me, that became a full time job because I needed to make sure that people could hear me, listen to me, and see me. I needed people to know that I exist. Otherwise, I couldn't get clients. And I still need that now. And this is, I would say that if you need to create a piece of content, what you need to think about first of all is who are you trying to reach? Who is that client? The wrong answer is to say, I don't know, institutional investors, because that's meaningless. Because an institutional investor, I'm just using that as a hypothetical example. It could be a pharmaceutical company, it could be anything. But that institutional investor is a human being. They probably have kids, family, go shopping. They may have political views. They may care about the environment. They may be a vegetarian. They may love traveling, listening to music, watching Netflix. They're human beings. And once you understand that, and you can understand that who you're talking to is a person, a human being, and you're trying to influence a particular person, then you need to think, how am I going to influence that person? What I do whenever I create a piece of content, and I do this every time, I get a piece of paper and I write, why should they care? I forget about myself, about my objectives, about my job, about what I care about, and I think about what do they care about. So how can I make them listen to me? Right? I've got on, say, LinkedIn 2 seconds to make it count because it's a fast-paced social media platform. I need to instill an emotion in that person. I need to make them care. So let's talk about jobs data. If I just say, I don't know, jobs data has gone down, or jobs have gone down, or something's gone down, that's meaningless. But if I say more Americans could be unemployed next year, suddenly people listen. Because if I'm an American, I'm going to get worried because I'm worried because I go to work and I'm worried about layoffs at work. Suddenly I'm listening, So it's about trying to, first of all, get that emotion and get that person to listen to you within a few seconds. And once they're listening to you, then you can say what you want. And this is the key. So if you're creating content on a social media platform, social media platforms are fast thinking platforms. There's this common misbelief that people don't have concentration spans because we live in a data rich world. I've heard that so many times. It's not true. People do have concentration spans, but just not for social media. On social media, they're thinking fast. They're flying through their feeds. They're taking in lots of information and they're filtering rapidly what's relevant and what's interesting to them, whether it's on Instagram, on YouTube, on LinkedIn, or any other platform. It's just like even if you pick up a newspaper, you do it as well. You flick through the newspaper to read only the stories that are interesting because your training journey is only so long. And that's just the way it is. So you've got to make it count. You've got to you've got to tap into that fast thinking brain, get an emotional response, get them to listen to you. And only when they're listening to you, then you can get them to think slowly and take in everything that you want them to listen to. And if you do that, you can explain some pretty complex topics to the average person, and you can get them to listen to you. And not only that, you can actually get your content to potentially go viral. I'm not saying that it needs to go viral, but you can. Um, and another thing is the most important thing is though you reach out and you hit your audience. You get the right people listening to you, which means that those people know who you are, they know what you're about. So if you call them, it's not an awkward conversation with you introducing yourselves. They already know who you are, and and it just makes it easier. You can get new clients on board, you can grow your business, and make it more scalable. And I think that's really where how content can work. So yes, it may not be your full-time job, but it is a big part of your job. Communication is probably the most important part of your job. If you are unable to communicate to your investors, then you should not be a CEO or in any senior position in your company. You need to be able to communicate, and content creation is one form of communication. Storytelling is one form of communication. You need to be able to master that if you want to scale and make your business successful.
Yeah, I think we have over engineered the whole aspect of content creation. Like when you start consciously thinking about, I'm going to create content, that is usually when people have the worst result. But let me distill down what you just said for everyone who's listening in. So you said that, okay, agreed, content creation is one of the most important things that I should be doing, because if my role is to grow the business is going to grow in, if I'm able to lay the narrative, like position it as a thing that is going to be beneficial for a bunch of people, which means I need to communicate well. Okay, point taken. But let's say now I am selling to, let's take my own startups example, right? Like I'm going to put myself under the sword here. So we are pitching to data leaders, we are pitching to business leaders, business stakeholders who are looking at a dashboard. And traditionally, whenever they are looking at a dashboard, they have a bunch of questions in their head. They're like, oh, why is there a spike here? Or why is there this dip? Why is this bar red in color? Now, traditionally, you could like look at the dashboard and maybe always call an analyst or a data person saying, hey, could you figure out what's going wrong in the state of Arizona, right? Like, or why is this happening, right? Like, and then you're like, okay, sure. That person goes and writes code. They have the ability, they master that. They go about making a graph and present it in the form of a PPT. This person is now looking at it. Now at Crunch, what we come and say is that, okay, that was all cool up until 2012 or 2015. Today, there's a very new piece of technology. And if you don't do it, you are essentially going to get out of job, even though it doesn't look like it today. Your organization is going to force you to adopt AI in a way where you can dive deeper, as opposed to calling that person. Despite however strongly you feel that is not a part of your job, you should still be doing it, because that's going to lead to like immense advantage for you as a business. And then if you don't do it, your business or your boss is somebody going to notice, and then they're just going to replace you with someone who's going to be familiar with it. But this is a very complex thing to demonstrate, because when you talk about that, I'm fighting against a lot of things. So these stakeholders, they're getting pitched random products which are BS all day, right? Like, so the minute they go look at an email or a message, they probably already make a judgment based on the first two words. You yourself said that LinkedIn is a very fast game, so maybe it's a 2 second span. Then there are these things where it's maybe the timing is not right, maybe their focus is not right. But what you are essentially saying, James, here is that if I pick that buyer and understand about, like, write down on a piece of white paper why they should care about what I'm saying, it'll probably be a bunch of things. It will be about that they want to be successful in their career. It would probably be that they want to be ahead of the curve. It would probably be that they want to prepare themselves for the future. It would probably be that they want to use the best of piece of the technology. And then what I'm supposed to do is actually just blast out, not blast, like I'm not saying spam, but actually just keep shooting these different communication pieces in different narratives, something which would eventually ultimately resonate with my buyer. Is that what you're coming to? Because chances are, if I try explaining, and this is where most founders fail, and I am guilty of like actually having gone the wrong path as well quite a few times, is that we want to show the best feature that we have developed. And
Yeah.
sometimes the best feature you have developed becomes overwhelming for the other person. So you should probably just go in and say that here is a new way of visualizing your data, and then wait for that person, like say it in a way that that person gets excited. I think that is what people call as hook. Write your post in a way that people get hooked to it. I'm not a big fan of that word hook, but yeah, I see it getting floated around so much that I also have started using it now. But am I on track here or am I off?
I think let's go back to what you said, because you said earlier on, you said, if I'm a CEO, I want my company to grow. Something along those lines. I think that earlier on you were describing the goals that that those executives would have, like grow the business,
Yeah.
make decision. I think that's probably what I don't do. I don't necessarily focus on the goals of my clients. So I focus on the emotions. So for me, I would go a little bit. I would go little bit higher level and more emotional, and say, okay, what kind of emotions can I get from them within a few seconds? So if I'm a CEO, CEOs tend to think pretty quickly because they have to. Um, Fear of missing out is one of the things. Fear of missing out to a competitor, fear of not seeing a risk, or seeing earnings go down next quarter. Really basic things, like real basic fears. So, or basic things that make that are part of their job, everyday job. So, long term goals are one thing, but what about the little things that keep them up at night, that keep them worried? And then that is something that you can really turn the narrative around. So you say, well, you don't have time to send an email to question that spike. You need the answer now. And that's what we provide, the answer now. And we use AI to do that. Obviously, you can double check that with a human being afterwards. But sometimes you need to make quick decisions, because if you don't make those quick decisions, that could hurt earnings next quarter, and your shareholders will be unhappy with you. So that's how you can turn that around. So suddenly you're talking about a problem, you're talking about the solution, that might be there. It may not be relevant to them, but for some CEOs, that is relevant. And that is content that they respect. If it's not relevant to them, they still respect it, because that's kind of cool. You know what I mean? Like to use a piece of AI to see a problem, and to question something, or pick up something. I mean, these days, you've got AI algorithms that can even interpret the dashboards themselves and pick up on things. I believe that that's what happened when COVID occurred. There was an AI algorithm that picked up on COVID before any human being did, and that's a cool story. I don't know the details. I have to go online and Google it, but this is what I mean. So there's a coolness factor, there's an emotional factor, but you don't necessarily need to spoon feed the story. If you want your company to expand 10x, you must do this. That's not what I'm saying. All I'm saying is, go to something that any human being can relate to, and tap into it. Talk about it. Show why it matters. And what you described does sound cool, and does solve a pretty important problem for a lot of senior executives. And I'll also be honest with you. I personally, I hate looking at dashboards. They do my head in sometimes. Like especially when you see those really really big dash. In my industry, we have dashboards everywhere. In asset management,
Yeah.
we use heat maps. We're constantly looking at data, and sometimes it can be overwhelming. So that's also another thing. What if we missed something on that dashboard? what if that spike that we should have seen, we didn't see, and subsequently because of that, we have lost a lot of money. So
Yeah.
I think that that's how I would look at it. I don't think you should blast out spoon-fed content, solving solving problems that weren't there before with solutions. I mean, I'm not a big fan of that, but I think you can definitely hit the target by just tweaking the narrative and making it relatable
Yeah.
to your
So
audience.
appeal to the emotions. Appeal to the emotions is what you're going about. And you're saying like why what do they care about? That is mostly from an emotional lens. Point well taken. Now let's say I have the attention of this person, right? Like it's still a long shot because now they're just gotten interested on, oh, so this person is saying, what if I miss this spike that I should not have missed? And they are now willing to know more. Chances are they're trying to do it on their own. They probably land onto my website. They probably go see a YouTube video where I have done a bad job and they're already like making judgment on, oh, this is what the product does. Or for that matter, maybe sometimes if luck is in your favor, they agree to come on a call and you jump on that call. But there also, all the time, you're just trying to like build a story, right? Like, and I see a lot of people putting conscious effort into making it a story and a narrative, and that is where they exactly get out of touch. Like it becomes like a pitch. uh, how do you do that? Like what would
I
you
mean,
recommend
what
folks
you're
to do that?
describing is actually a transition. So you're moving from short format content to longer format content. So if you look at content, like let's take this to a different level. Let's most sales teams have a sales pipeline, right? And they will have different stages of the pipeline. I'm not a sales guy. You're probably not a sales guy either, but that's what they have. They have like their prospects, the first conversations, all the way to when they onboard a client, right? Big, huge kind of spreadsheet, and they'll have sales targets and goals and whatever. That's not what we're interested in. But within that sales pipeline, the conversations they will have will differ. So we're talking about the prospect stage, social media. So when you walk into a room, say at a conference event, and you introduce yourself, you don't give a full blown pitch. You say, "Hi, I'm Vikram, and I do this, and I come from here." That's usually what you do. That's what most normal human beings would do. You introduce yourself, you have an interesting conversation, a bit of banter, may break the ice a little bit with some jokes, have a pleasant conversation, and get to know the person. And content's kind of like that. So in the beginning, when you've used this kind of emotionally driven short format content to attract the attention of whoever you're trying to attract, what you're trying to do is introduce yourself, or at least get them to be interested in you. Once they're interested in you, they'll pay more attention, um, and they will consume your longer form content. And longer form content is different. When you write a white paper or thought leadership article, you're using a completely different style. You're writing in detail. There's still a narrative. There's still a story you're telling. Chances are that they already respect your intellect. Spend 15 to 30 minutes listening to you because and this is the biggest mistake a lot of people make, especially in the industry I come from. So in wealth management and asset management, there's lots of clever people there. There are lots of academics, and they're great at writing white papers and thought leadership articles. But those white papers and thought leadership articles don't work on social media, because if I don't know who you are and I don't respect your intellect, I'm not going to spend 30 minutes of my time reading something I don't know what the outcome is going to be for me. It's a waste of my time. It's a risk for me. I'm wasting time.
Yeah.
So I would say that by the time someone's listening to you, when they've consumed your social media content and they've got to know you, at that stage, they're going to be more willing to spend a bit more time listening to you, because they kind of
Yeah.
know where this conversation is going. And I think that's the clear indicator. When you know where the conversation is going, you're going to invest a little bit more time to listen and pay attention,
Yeah.
and you're going to be more forgiving if the content's a little bit boring, and you're going to be a bit more patient with the person, because hey, there might be something in this for me, so I'm going to just slow down a bit, listen to Vikram, listen to his YouTube video that he doesn't highly rate, or, and actually he might have something to say here that's beneficial to me. So I think that there is this transition from fast content on social media to slow thinking, thoughtful thought leadership, white paper, academic style content, which you tend to have at the latter stages of the relationship with your potential client. So overall, there's different types of content used for different purposes. Prospects and first introductions, you're going to use kind of fast thinking content. And those people who know you, got to know you, like you, about to be onboarded as clients, long format, more thoughtful content. And that's the way I look at it, in that kind of simple way. There's kind of like a conveyor belt, and you're serving different types of content depending on who you on who that where that person is on the conveyor belt. Um,
James, but do you think like people should pay attention to shifts as well? Like, for example, does it matter if Vikram is talking about data today, and for whatsoever reason, Vikram starts talking about dance tomorrow because, hey, maybe my data thing didn't work out, which is what happens to a lot of people, right? Like they go through pivots and then they are building something completely different. The entire
yeah,
network and the attention span and the people who are listening to them are now just not going to resonate with the new topic. And there is like a new journey that starts.
I
I'm
mean,
sure you have gone through this cycle. Yeah.
it's part of being a founder, right? And it's actually very natural to pivot, um, even after you've raised money. To pivot slightly, to take the business in a slightly different direction, is a very normal thing to do. And as long as you understand why you're doing it, and you're brave enough sometimes to do it, because it also requires
Yeah.
an element of bravery to pivot and to realize that this is not the optimal direction for the business. I think it's totally fine to do that. It's absolutely fine. It's part of the evolutionary. It's an evolutionary process. So it's like branding, right? Brands don't stay the same. They don't stay static. Their logos are always changing over the years. The same with the business. The business model is always evolving. The business model has to evolve because the environment that it's in is always changing. The economy is restructuring, changing, shifting, and so a business has to adapt naturally. It's just when you're a smaller business and a founder, you have to you have to make sometimes bigger changes than when you're a more established business. A more established business that has cash flow coming in, there's multiple revenue streams. You don't have to pivot as drastically. But when you're a small startup, sometimes you have to in order to survive. So I don't have a problem with that. I think that's just a natural part of business.
Yeah. And content is best done by yourself. You would agree, right? Like, because there are these people who outsource content. And of course, you can outsource this, but there's still like a lack of luster that comes in. So I think like that's a given. I would assume your answer to that is that yes, if you
I
can do
think you should
content on
always
your,
start yourself trying. I mean, it's absolutely fine to outsource, but you should be the one. You should be comfortable with the narrative that you're telling. It's important for you to be comfortable, and it's okay to bring someone in to help you tell the narrative. So
yeah.
it's like sometimes you do need to bounce ideas off someone. You need more brains,
Hmm.
and if you're a small business, the one thing that you don't have are lots of people, because you don't have a huge um, you don't have a huge number of employees. But um, the most effective way to generate ideas is to get people who are smarter than you and surround yourself with them. And if you if you use people and I'm not so I don't use the word outsource. That's the wrong kind of word. But bringing people in to bounce ideas off is fantastic. It's a fantastic way to create content. And content creators, if you find you're with a content creator that doesn't bring any new ideas to the table, they're probably not the right person for you. They
Yeah.
may bring you a schedule or a plan of content that they will create, and I think that's fine, but there's always the risk that you end up not giving it your full attention. And then that becomes a communication issue, because then you're not really communicating about your business, you're outsourcing your communication to someone, and and that's kind of risky. um,
Yeah.
I think, yeah, it's a complicated one, because on the one hand, I think it's okay to bring in people, like to consult people, to generate to create new ideas, but you should always be at the center of that process, driving it forward and be in control of it.
Yeah.
Um, when you're dealing with content creators externally.
How do you measure the effectiveness of all of this, James? Like, what do you use personally? Because of course, like one very obvious metric is, if in my case, if I'm trying to close a deal, how many deals have I actually closed for the volume of content that I produce? But sometimes that may actually be very harsh,
Yes.
because you can't. Yeah. So how do you
I
recommend
don't think you
measuring it?
can. I don't think it's prescriptive because every business is different. Every business generates cash in a different way and has a different type of business model. But what you have to do is you have to somehow create, and I think this is really neglected actually. You need to create some sort of return on marketing spent. So
Yeah.
if you're going to spend X amount on marketing, you got to also measure the return you're getting from that. And there's no clear answer how to do that. But sometimes you need to make unrealistic metrics, like you just mentioned. You have that metric you mentioned. You have to do it. You need some kind of metric to start somewhere so that you can measure yourself whether or not you've improved or declined. Even if the numbers aren't great, you need to be able to see whether or not marketing is adding any value at all. Otherwise, you're just spending money on nothing. And unfortunately, a lot of companies do that. And you see a lot of very large companies doing that. They spend huge amounts of money on marketing and they never measure the effectiveness of it, whether or not it actually adds anything to the bottom line. They don't even try to create a metric to capture it. I mean, whatever metric you create will never be perfect, but you should try to measure it somehow, because otherwise you don't know what you're getting.
Yeah.
And like for me, if you want to know my personal metrics, what I look at, I have like very basic metrics, like how many inbound leads resulted in cash flow per month. That's my main metric. So I want to see maybe say one or two clients contacting me for business, not me going out and
Yeah.
getting them. I want to inbound marketing, because anything that's inbound is because of marketing. If anybody
Yeah.
contacts me and says, James, love your work, want to do business with you, that's it. That's because of my content. So my content has made money. LinkedIn has made money for me. And that's how I measure it. So I will count. I have a metric where I will see how many number of clients I've got, and I will look at the total gross cash flow in per month,
Yeah.
and that's my very basic metric that I use to measure not whether or not my content has been successful. Obviously, it's easier for me because I'm a small firm, but um, there should be something like that. If you're running a big business and you're spending lots of money in marketing, measure it. Otherwise, you don't know what you're getting.
L-
Um,
Yeah.
Simple
Absolutely.
as that.
Love it, James. This has been a very fun chat, but we have to always end good things as well. I always ask this question to folks on this show, and it doesn't have to be related about the topic we have talked about, but I have a feeling it's going to be. Do you have any closing thoughts? Like, what are the three things that you would like to leave our audience with? Three bullet points uh, that you have learned over the years, which you'd like to share with everyone.
Well, just to reiterate, visibility is everything. If nobody knows who you are, no one sees you, you can't grow a business, especially in this digital age. That's the other thing, scalability. So when you're creating content, using a platform like a social media platform, it has potential to be the biggest revenue generator for your business because of the sheer scale and number of people you can reach. And then thirdly, it's how you reach those people. So if you're able to make your content appeal to everyone, you don't have to. You can also be targeted. I'm also very targeted. But if you can make your content accessible to everyone, then you just increase the chances of getting those inbound leads and those and those new clients and net new money. And I think that's a very messy way to deliver three bullet points, but that's what I'd say:
Yeah.
visibility, um, the scalability of the internet,
No, no, but they're very spot on, James.
and
This
also
was super fun.
accessibility, or um, I think that's the other thing: making your content accessible and understandable and relatable.
Yeah, no, this was super fun, James. And I love the points, like that point visibility, speaking to someone yesterday who does data visualization for automobiles, and the last statement that they made was very powerful. They went and said that when I go to an automobile manufacturer, what I tell them is that a car not viewed is a car not sold. And I think it's like I'm in a habit of like drawing parallels between random things. So I was just trying to like draw a parallel, but I love it. Thank you so much for
Oh,
doing this,
great,
James.
Aaron.
I had
Thank you.
a fun time.
Great. Thank you very
Thanks.
much, Vikram.
Bye.